Hi, Paul. Thanks for joining me today to have the discussion around disability. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, if that's okay. So I'll start with, disability is a protected characteristic that we know is rarely recognised within the policing workforce. Where would you say we are with national work to understand disability better and to more fully represent disabled people within the policing?
I would start by sort of looking at what disability is, because it's a very emotive word for some people. Clearly, if you have a disability, you are covered by the Equalities Act. And there are people with disabilities working in policing, physical, sensory disabilities in particular, so being hard of hearing, partially sighted, or indeed blind, or those with physical impairments. And then we have those who are neurodiverse as well. Now, many of them may not actually say, or may say, that they're not actually disabled. They don't like that moniker being applied to them. But in terms of my answer, I will refer to all of those categories. So whenever I use the word disabled or neurodiverse, I mean sort of everybody. We are improving, but as the question implies, we are probably improving at a rate of knots that is slower than some of the other protected characteristics within policing. It is something that frustrates me greatly because we've been doing a lot of work over the last 4 or 5 years in particular, looking at what better service provision around things like reasonable adjustments could be. But it still feels that we're having conversations and battles that really aren't required, aren't necessary, and sometimes we even seem to be going backwards. So, for example, providing reasonable adjustments for an interview process where questions are provided prior to an interview, we still have some forces which are insisting that that may only be 10 minutes prior to an interview. Now, as I understand it, best practice to provide questions prior to an interview is actually 2 days. Now, this is something that should be given to all candidates, not just those who are disabled or neurodiverse, because for me, the purpose of an interview is to get the best candidate for a job, regardless of who they are. And by saying to somebody, well, yes, we'll give you the questions, but only 10 minutes before, will probably in reality not elicit the best responses from them. Now, these are the conversations we continue to have, and in the ideal world, we would have a national standard of reasonable adjustments, of provision, of office provision, of service provision, of interview provision, so that all people benefit and it is not a lottery of which force you happen to be in. And the other point I would continue to make and do continually make is around intersectionality. One of the big issues for me in policing is how we look at some of our main protected characteristic streams, particularly ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, and disability neurodivergence, as being discrete, whereas individuals will touch into all of those groups and indeed others. And we really must stop looking at people just having one protected characteristic, because it will be very rare. Just as those who are disabled or neurodiverse, it will probably be relatively rare for them just to have one condition. We need to understand that they may well have more than one condition, as indeed I myself do. I'm arthritic, I'm autistic, I'm dyslexic, and quite possibly have ADHD. So, you know, I am disabled, I am neurodiverse, I'm a man, I'm a heterosexual white male, so I don't fit into some of those other categories, but many of my colleagues will do.
Thank you. And you mentioned a few points that we've discussed a number of times in terms of nationally. I think around that language used in terms of defining disability, I think that's really important, isn't it? And we've also discussed intersectionality and how we can improve that working across the different diverse groups to bring about that national change. So it's really, really important. It's something that working with yourself, we take forward for the Police Supers Association. The other thing that I thought I'd raise around sort of that national picture and ask your views is around how we collect data, because I know that's one of the big challenges, isn't it, that we're pushing for in terms of better collection of data around disability.
Yeah, and I think this for me, and it might seem an odd one, this for me is the biggest issue that we need to address. do I use the D word, the word of discrimination? That until you actually know how people who are disabled or neurodiverse are doing in things like exams or in interview processes, how do you know whether or not those processes and those exams are fair? Now, we clearly can't force anybody to disclose who they are, and many disabilities or neurodiverse conditions will be hidden disabilities. What we must do, though, is give people the opportunity to record who they are in a way that they want to. So asking somebody who believes they're not disabled but they're neurodiverse, or only giving them the opportunity to tick a box which says they are disabled, for me is not appropriate. And it's only by giving people that opportunity that we will actually understand who our staff team are. The next issue then is whether or not people are actually comfortable disclosing who they are. And that's the much bigger issue for me, of how do people feel in their workplace? Do I feel that my skills and abilities are fully utilised? No. I have skills and abilities that, particularly around analytics, that could be better used, as indeed many of my colleagues will do. And by understanding who your workforce are, giving them the opportunity to record who they are, and then using those skills and abilities in the workforce will actually put us in a much better position. So if I was asked, as the question implies, what one thing would I improve? It's improving that ability to data capture around who are we? Then we can actually start looking at interview processes. Well, why is it all these people who are neurodiverse, particularly those, for example, who may be autistic, are struggling passing interview processes? Well, maybe the interview processes are wrong. Why are people who are, for example, dyslexic, particularly struggling with NIE, sergeants or inspectors exams? Well, maybe the wording of those questions is wrong. Maybe how we're presenting those questions is wrong, though we have done quite a bit of work with the College of Policing on improving that. But until we actually know how people are failing, and that's a horrible thing to say, then we don't actually know how we can improve. Do I want to focus on failure? No. Do I feel there is failure inbuilt in the system? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. And like you say, that data collection, I think, does sort of form the basis for many things that we're going to talk about here. Is just that understanding is really important. So you mentioned a few things there around recruitment. What do you think we could do to encourage more disabled people to join policing, and to make them feel that it's actually an accessible and achievable job for them to aim for?
I think that's probably in reality a two-part question. One is around police staff, the other is around police officers. In the first instance, it's about advertising. How often do we put adverts out into the public arena that don't make an awful lot of sense to the people in policing who are actually reading them? So why we expect members of the public to understand them is really beyond me. So the wording of interviews, striving to be a disability confident employer, stating that we do actively welcome applications from disabled and neurodivergent people, having the recruitment and selection processes conducted in a way that is accessible, so that being conscious of the rooms that are being used, the lighting conditions, the noise conditions, being conscious of what job somebody's actually being interviewed for, and whether or not that interview and recruitment process equates to the job that the person's actually going to land up doing. Because what we often do is have a job that could be fundamentally practical and yet require somebody to sit in a collar and tie in an interview room. Is that really what's necessary? And that can obviously become really quite exclusionary to many people from many of our protected characteristics. So, but I think word of mouth is a big thing, that if our existing colleagues, police staff and police officers, are actually turning around and saying, yeah, this is a good place, they get it, then more people, I believe, will apply.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And that consistency that you mentioned earlier as well is something really important to get across forces, isn't it? Because I think there is some good practice, but it really does need to be consistent across the board. I was going to ask you about yourself now. So you've shared some really insightful blogs on your own personal journey, for which we thank you, within the PSA. Do you think we should encourage more people to speak out about issues linked to disability to raise the profile and understanding? I think you'll say yes, but yeah, your
Well,
reflections.
yeah, I will definitely say yes. Whether or not it's for us to encourage people to do it, let's deconstruct the word encourage. When I speak at conferences, I invariably get a number of people approaching me afterwards and saying thank you, and that actually encouraged me to come out or to unmask and to stand up in my own organisation and say we need to do better. I think it is incredibly helpful, particularly where people who have some rank feel able to come out, unmask themselves and say, this is who I am as a disabled or neurodiverse person. So people can say, well, first you can achieve, and secondly, the organisation will accept me. But I don't know how many of those people who have gone up the chain of command or have got promoted as police staff members actually knew they were disabled or neurodivergent during that journey. Because myself, I reached the rank of superintendent before I really understood who I was. Would I have gone higher or remained at a lower rank had I known who I was? I don't know, a great imponderable question. But is it critical that people see role models within their organisation? Yes. Are support networks critical within organisations? Absolutely. Do those support networks need to be given time to support colleagues? Yes, absolutely. And I know there remains, unfortunately, a level of cynicism over many support networks. But if you can speak to somebody who actually understands the journey that you have been on and are going through, that is essential to success within the workplace. And particularly when you look at some neurodivergent conditions, if that's the right word, there are some additional challenges that will frequently go hand in hand with that condition. So self-reflection, mental health conditions, tiredness, all these are things that it's helpful to have somebody to talk with and through. And if you, particularly if you've got somebody like, like myself, I can only talk about my own personal experience. The number of people I have get in touch with me asking for support, that may in part because of be because of me, but I think a major part of it is because of my rank and the fact that I can actually talk to people from sort of a position of some experience and authority. But it's not all about rank. It's not all about staff grade. It's about ensuring people feel comfortable, confident and comfortable to actually unmask and say, this is who I am. And my experience is the reception people get is usually positive. It might explain a lot of things that people do and say, and people, that's why. But that's a very personal journey for people to go through. And as I say, that's why I think support networks are so critical in helping people go through that journey.
Yeah, thank you. And so some really useful advice and support there. But in terms of that then, around how would you say or advise that workplaces could be more welcoming for disabled employees? You've covered some things around that in terms of peer support. Are there other things that forces can do to make a workplace more welcoming?
I think it's, and I suppose the answer to that question comes in two parts, whether or not the person is unmasked as a disabled or neurodivergent person. I think the thing, and a very personal answer to this would be that people actually utilised my skills, that I demonstrate skills in the workplace. And if people came to me and said, Paul, you are the person that we need to help us with this issue, this problem, this project, then I would actually feel that the skills I have are appreciated. I'm sure everybody would say that because everybody has skills and abilities, and we should all go to people's strengths and help people develop anything where they may well feel weaker. But physical accessibility is clearly very important. Consideration of people, and it could be as simple as, and has happened to me in the last few weeks, where I'm struggling to walk at the moment because of an injury, and people have offered to make me a cup of tea. And it might seem really simple, but that human touch of just actually saying, can I help you there? I've had people offer to carry my bag into work for me. which is very nice. It's very difficult to say thank you, but it's just that human touch, because I think the attitude overcomes the physical restrictions of buildings. And if people are supportive, welcoming, appreciative of the skills and abilities people have, and then offer assistance, that can go a long, long way. And I think, that's ultimately what teamwork's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that support, as you say, can make a real difference, and that sort of flexibility. So there's that human touch, but I think organisations can go a long way to being flexible and meeting people's needs, so they can sort of achieve what they want in the workplace. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for talking to me today. Really appreciate it once again. So thanks very much.
Thank you.